Right now in Korea, there is a large international meeting called the World Education Forum. This meeting, convened by the United Nations and UNESCO, is designed to set the development goals for the world for the next 15 years. This follows on to the Millennium Development Goals, which in 2000 stated where all of the international agencies and countries wanted the world population to be by 2015. We made it to 2015 and we didn't quite accomplish all of the goals, and they're now considering a follow-on set of goals. These goals are very ambitious and include such things as by 2030 we should eradicate poverty everywhere. Now this obviously is not a realistic goal, and it probably doesn't provide the kind of measuring stick and incentive to nations and international agencies to work on development. As an alternative, Ludger Woosman and I have worked with the OECD to provide a set of estimates of what it would mean to have serious education goals and what that would mean for the rest of development. What we did was to look at the prior goals, which were essentially that every student in the world should get to at least lower secondary schooling, 8th or 9th grade of schooling. But the problem with the prior goals is that they were not very clear on the quality of schooling that should be achieved. As a result, we see that there was dramatic progress since 2000 in access to schools. More students are in school today, dramatically so, in many developing countries. The problem is, as best we can tell, many of them didn't learn anything when they were in school. They were in school, but they weren't getting basic skills. What we've done in our report, which is entitled Universal Basic Skills and is published by the OECD, is to estimate what would be the economic impact of achieving not only access, full access to secondary school, but access to quality schools. In this, what we've done is try to have a measurable quality standard. We chose what is called level 1 on the international PISA test. The PISA tests are the international tests run by the OECD and cover about 70 countries now. Level 1 is the most basic level of skills. So to understand level 1, it might be best to just look at a simple problem. If we take the following problem. I flew from California to Washington last week. My ticket cost $1,200. The exchange rate between the dollar and the euro is 1 to 1.1. How much did my ticket cost in euros? Level 1 says that a 15-year-old should be able to answer that and similar questions, and that is the basic skill levels that we choose, this exchange rate problem. Now it turns out that many students, even in developed countries, cannot reliably solve that problem. For example, in the United States, 24% of 15-year-olds do not reach level 1. In developing countries, it gets much larger. So, for example, in Mexico, 60% of 15-year-olds cannot achieve that level. What we did in the OECD report, Universal Basic Skills, is to take the current achievement levels and access attendance levels of 76 countries in the world and project out what would be the economic impact if they first provided complete access at their current level of quality of schools. Second, if they took just the people currently in schools and increased it so that everybody at least got this minimum basic skills. And third, what if they did both simultaneously, universal access and high quality level? The results are actually quite amazing. First, for the lower and middle income countries that we have in our 76 countries, they would get an economic gain that was twice the current value of their GDP from just providing access to everybody. Now, these calculations come from using our work on economic growth that relates achievement to economic growth and projecting that out into the future for 80 years, then taking the present value, in other words, weighting distant things by a small amount and current things heavily. But this twice GDP for middle income countries is actually moves to 6 times GDP if they just took the students currently in schools and increased the quality to this minimum level. If you did both simultaneously, you get something over 10 times GDP. Now, the interesting part about this is that it's a goal that applies also to the developed countries of the world, to the OECD. So, for example, the United States, with 24% of its students 15-year-olds that can't solve that problem, if we moved all those students at the bottom up to level 1, it would be about 1.5 times the current US GDP, which is a big number since the current US GDP is around $17 trillion. It turns out if we put this in terms of the future growth of US GDP that would apply with no improvement in schools compared to what would happen if we brought everybody up to this minimum level, something that looks a lot like No Child Left Behind, it would amount to 3.5% of current GDP on average every year into the future. But that's exactly what we spend on primary and secondary education now. So in other words, the gains in GDP would be sufficient to finance all of our schooling if we could, in fact, get the quality up. So the bottom line of our report is that a goal of universal basic skills would provide the growth to economies around the world, the growth that would allow everybody to reach an inclusive level of growth, that where everybody benefited, all countries benefited, and the people within every country benefits. This is exactly what the new Sustainable Development Goals being discussed in Korea are all about, everybody doing better, but this is how you do it. And we know of no alternative other than to improve the quality of our schools and the quality of schools in both developed and developing countries.